Interview my mother. What is your name?
My name is Margaret Bazari Irwin.
When were you born?
November 6th, 1958.
Where were you when these attacks happened on 9/11?
I was actually at home, at my home in Millbrook, New York. We were living there when the attacks happened, and I was actually home pregnant with Patrick. And I usually went into the city on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and 9/11 happened on a Tuesday. And I woke up that morning and I just didn't feel good. And for whatever reason, I decided not to go into the city that day. And I was going to go in Wednesday, the following day. And I remember turning on the television, and I think I got a phone call from my sister that said, I think there's been attacks on, a plane went into the Twin Tower. And I turned on the television and I actually saw the plane fly fly into the second tower. And then I sort of immediately knew that we were under attack. And then I was mesmerized. I actually watched the buildings come down live on television. And it was just devastating to watch what was going on that day. And the thing about it was really funny. The thing that I also remember about 9/11 was that it was an absolutely beautiful day out. It was one of those late, that early fall. It was about 70 degrees. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. And to this day, sometimes when it's those beautiful days, it was so crisp. I always say 9/11 was like that. But anyway, so I remember my husband calling me, and he came home from work. And I remember thinking to ourselves, we were so scared because I was pregnant with Patrick, and we thought to ourselves, what are we bringing this baby into? Because it was so frightening, because I never had the experience of living in a country where there was actual war going on. It didn't happen in my lifetime until that point.
How did security change following 9/11?
Well, it was immediate. The security changed. I remember that night because there was no planes weren't allowed to be in the air for a few days after 9/11. I don't forget how long it was, but it could have even been like a week or so. But that night when we were up in Millbrook, and it's so quiet, and you could hear trains and traffic at night, but everything that night was dead still. And the only thing that you could hear was all over the tri-state area were the fighter jets just flying back and forth, and they were all through the skies, and every half hour to an hour you would hear the planes fly overhead, and you knew they were flying low and they were fighter planes. I never heard that before. Never in my lifetime did I have fighter planes flying above my head like that. So I think the security changed immediately.
When did you first learn about terrorists?
I don't know. I think that terrorists I learned probably in through books and through, terror always existed. I mean, there was the Irish Republican Army. They had, they were terrorists in some ways. My husband would probably disagree with that, but I think they were terrorists. And, terrorists always existed, but it wasn't something that, and I learned about it through the news, through newspapers, through books. But it was always something that I thought happened in other countries. I never thought it happened in the United States. It's not something that I put in my head, which was a real serious problem.
What were the threats before the attack on 9/11?
I think that probably about 10 years or 7, I want to say it was either 7 years, 11 years, I forget what it was. The terrorists did try to bomb they tried to drive a van into the Twin Towers, and I think the bomb didn't go up as much as they wanted to, but I do believe that there was a number of people killed in that attack. So I think that was the first attack that I remember that affected me.
How was the threat communicated to you following the attacks?
How was the threat?
Communicated to you following the attacks?
I don't know. The threat, when you go in, since I work in the city, you will know that there's, what they call red alert, orange alerts, and it depends. If New York is on a red alert, which it happens sometimes, you'll just see the total difference in Grand Central. You'll see heightened security. There'll be, you'll see armed forces in the station. You'll see, after that there was, police officers on the cars all the time. So it was communicated to me through the news and the paper and everything else. But it was something that I saw because I would walk in. I traveled to a place that's a high risk for terror attacks.
When did you first travel on a plane following the attacks?
I think it was probably, I want to say it was like June or July. My mom lived down in Florida, and I couldn't travel right after that because, as I said before, I was pregnant with Paddy. But I think I traveled probably about 12 weeks after Paddy was born. And my mom had gotten breast cancer, and she had to have a lumpectomy. So I flew down to Florida in order. So it was probably about 3 or 4 months after the attack.
What relationship did you have with the city?
I love the city. I mean, I still love New York City. The thing that I worked in the city for years. I've worked in the city probably for 35 years now, 40 years. But no, not that many years, not 40 years, but 30 years I've worked in New York. And I had my office in the city. I work in Midtown. I didn't work in Midtown. I didn't work downtown. But my office was right, it was up high. It was on the 48th floor of the GM building. And one view was of Central Park, and the other view was the Twin Towers. So it was, the Twin Towers was always there for me, and I saw it every day. And then one day, it wasn't there anymore. They were gone. So my relationship with the city is that I love it, and I still go into the city at least two to three times a week.
When was the last time you were in the city following the attacks?
I think that the last time that I think I went into work that following week. I didn't go into work the whole week. It was either 1 week or 2 weeks after 9/11. I think I went in that following Tuesday. I had to go back to work. I don't believe I took 2 weeks off, but I don't really remember. I think it was either 1 week or 2 weeks after 9/11. I was back in the city again.
Did you see the destruction when you went?
No, you couldn't really see the destruction because I'm all the way uptown. The only destruction that I saw was, through the media. But I could see that there was a different feel for the city. There was the city just looked different. That when you heard an ambulance, you would panic. It was always something that it was on a city on edge. Let's put it that way.
How close were you to what remained?
I don't know how far. Probably a couple miles. I work on 57th. It was downtown. Maybe it's even more than that. I don't realize. But you could see it when you're up high in the buildings, but I obviously couldn't see it down low. I really wasn't very, very, I was blocks and blocks away from ground zero.
Did you know anyone affected in these attacks?
Absolutely. I knew people personally that were killed in the attacks. I knew people that, the company that I worked for, the CEO of my company was best friends with the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald. And Cantor Fitzgerald was a financial company that I think they're investment bankers that lost almost all of their employees. And the CEO of that company did not go to work that day because it was his son's first day of kindergarten. And instead, he went to go see his son off at school. And he was one of the only people that weren't killed that day. So it affected us because, he was good friends with the president of my company. And at the time, my company was a small, very small company. And then the doctor that actually, the gynecologist that delivered Paddy when I had Paddy, he also delivered that same week. It was just a couple of days apart. There was a woman whose husband was a firefighter, and he was killed in 9/11, and she gave birth to her son in the same hospital that Paddy was born the same week. So my gynecologist delivered a 9/11 baby. So it's just, it affected me greatly, and it still affects me greatly. I still think about it, and it bothers me, and it brings back incredible memories.
Did everyone think there was going to be more attacks?
Absolutely. I mean, we always thought that there were going to be more attacks. I remember right after, I don't know if it was like a year later or I want to say it was in September, so not maybe it was a year later or a little bit more than that. There was a blackout in all of New York, and I was on the train coming home when the blackout happened, and I remember being stopped in Westchester, and it happened to be in the town where I actually grew up in. So it was easy for me to get to call somebody and have them pick me up at the train station. But I remember at that time thinking that it was another attack on New York City at that time. You still can't help but think it. You still see it. I mean, I think you know that we're all vulnerable when you look at the attacks on in Paris not too long ago, and you see all the different attacks.
How did your community react to these attacks?
Well, my work community, it just, pulled the rug out from underneath us. My community, we were all affected because I think everybody, I mean, living in the tri state area and commuting into New York, you couldn't help but feel that, have people affected by it all.
Do you think the community changed as a whole?
Do I think the community changed? I guess so. I mean, I think people were just it, I think if somebody was alive, if people were alive during 9/11, they sort of can tell you exactly where they were when they heard about it. It just rocked everybody's world. There was never attacks on, besides like the Civil War and the Revolutionary War. I mean, we didn't grow up in an era of having attacks on in the country in which we lived. The attacks were always in other countries, so it changed our world for that.
After the attacks, what did you think of immigrants?
Well, I don't think it affected me towards immigrants or made me feel like there shouldn't be any immigrants allowed in the country. Did it make me aware of the Muslim population? Did it make me pay attention more? Of course it did. I would be, you can't help but do that. It's just was my human nature to be more aware. If you saw somebody that wasn't a regular on the train, or if you saw somebody acting weird on the train, you would think twice about it. So that changed me. But immigrants, no, I didn't. It didn't bother me with immigrants per se.
Did you feel safe around them?
Well, I mean, you get 9/11. I resent things that 9/11 made me feel. And here's a perfect example. Right after the Paris attacks, I was on the train and this family of Muslims got on the train. And there was this beautiful little girl that sat next to me. It was Christmas time, so it was a holiday. So it was really a crowded train. And she was probably about 8 or 9 years old. She sat down next to me. And I remember looking at the family saying, what are they doing? I know I hadn't seen them before. You get used to seeing the same people on the trains. And I remember in my pea brain of a head thinking to myself, I wonder if these guys are terrorists. And then the conductor was coming up and I saw the panic on this little girl's face when the conductor was coming up. And then it realized, because I think that the mother instinct just kicked in, and I said, I'm sure your mom has you covered, because I think she was nervous because she didn't have a train ticket and she was afraid that, she was going to get in trouble or something. So I saw the panic. And the conductor came by and he took my train ticket, and then he looked at her and he said, your mom gave me your ticket. And I said, see, I told you she had you covered. But it really bothered me that I would have thought that this beautiful little girl could have been a terrorist. And that's what 9/11 left me. And it makes me angry that I even feel that way some days.
Do you think this attack led to some people hating Muslims?
Well, hating them, yeah, I think they did. I think that some people do. They couldn't help it because it had such an impact. Mostly if you were and I think I want to see the good in most people. I don't want people, to just take one race and totally think that they're horrible human beings. I mean, you never hate that. You never want that. But you can't help but have a preconceived notion when you lived through 9/11. Changed who we were.
Did you live in the city, or did you live in New York at the time?
No, I didn't live in New York at the time. I did live in New York State. And as I said, I lived up in Millbrook, New York at the time, but I did work in the city.
How far away did you live from the city?
I lived about 65, 70 miles from New York City.
Um, did a 9/11 change your view of the city?
Did it change my? Yeah, it did. I mean, because it makes you, you can't help but think some days I go into the city and I just want to get out fast because you know that it's at high risk and you're wondering is today the day that they're going to try to attack Grand Central or attack the building that I work in. The building that I work in actually has a breezeway that goes from 57th Street to 56th Street. And I remember they built these great big huge pillars on the front of, where the breezeway was so cars couldn't just go in. You see stuff like that and it changes you. Maybe some days you just don't want to be in the city. And I loved New York City.
Do you still love New York?
Absolutely. I just said that. I love New York. I love what it represents. I truly believe that it's one of the greatest cities in the world. And I love when I've watched bringing my kids into the city and I watch my oldest son who absolutely adores New York. And I remember when he was a baby, just, loving the architecture and everything else. But I love New York and I think it has so much to offer people and I think it's a beautiful city.
All right, that's all my questions I have to ask. Thank you for listening to my presentation on 9/11.